Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapah Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantir Me Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all say what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Asato ma satkamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityorma amritam gamaya, aviravirmayeti, rudrayatte takshinam mukham, te namam pahi nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. We start today on verse number 120. Avyaktametat trigunairniruktam tatkaranam nama shariramatmanaha sushuptiretasya vibhaktiyavastha pralina sarvendriya buddhi vrittihi. The unmanifest, avyakta, said to be comprised of the three gunas, is the causal body, karana sharira, of the Atman. Deep sleep is its special state in which subside all the senses and the thought waves of the mind. So this big section that we have been studying for the last few weeks deals with the non-self, that which is not the me. Because that was one of the questions the student had asked. If Vedanta is inquiry into the nature of the self, and if that self is hidden under layers of that which is not self, then it makes sense to first understand what this non-self is. Because once I know what the non-self is, all that I need to do is just peel it off, to remove it, and the self will be found. And so, in answer to the student's question, what is the non-self? In Sanskrit, it's called Anatma. Which are these layers over me? The section that we have been studying had been explaining that. And we saw how the layers were explained in terms of three major categories. The outermost layer was called the Sthula Sharira, the gross body, which is the visible part of our personality. A layer inside that was called the Sukshma Sharira, the subtle body, and we saw what things comprise the subtle body. And now what we are looking at is the innermost layer called the Karana Sharira, the causal body. And the causal body, as this verse points out, is primarily the avyakta. Avyakta means that which is not manifested. In other terms, sometimes you'll find these different terms in books, but there are a lot of synonymous terms. So avyakta is sometimes also referred to as avidya or ignorance, which is also referred to as maya. So just because different words are used, it does not necessarily mean some different category has been introduced. And so here, avyakta or unmanifest means the maya. And we saw in the last class how the entire material universe has the three attributes, the three gunas, rajas, tamas, and sattva. And we saw their functionality, what they do, and how they work. That is why this verse says, the unmanifest, said to be comprised of the three gunas, is the causal body. Now, we've also seen, just to refresh your memory, the word body in Sanskrit it just kind of feels a little bit, in English it feels a bit odd to say we have got 3 bodies, because when you say body, we instinctively understand this thing. But the Sanskrit word for body is sharira, and etymologically the word means that which wears away, that which is constantly getting worn out. And that's the nature of the body. That's how, through the different life stages we pass through, we know that gradually the body is wearing away. And so in that sense, Karana Sharira means the causal. Karana is the cause. So why is this deep sleep state the special state? What does special state mean? Special state here means that it's in that deep sleep state that this innermost layer can be easily recognized. Now, Maya is the innermost layer. Maya is present in all the 3 states. As long as we are in ignorance, we are. So even now, Maya is present. Even when we dream, Maya is present. But right now, because of the presence of all these names and forms, objects, people, there's so much to distract our minds that unless you are specifically studying some philosophical text, very rarely, if anyone, thinks about Maya. We go on thinking about the table, the chair, my friend, and this and that, and Maya is at the background of it all. Therefore, although Maya is present now and also in dream state, it's very difficult to remember its presence. But when we go to the deep sleep state, everything that distracts us in the waking state, in the dream state, is absent there. There is no world, there is no name, there is no form, nothing. So the covering that exists in the deep sleep state, that is the causal body. And because there is nothing else, that is considered a special state, because that is where we are able to see this layer when the other layers are functionally absent. So that is the meaning of the deep sleep is its special state in which subside all the senses and the thought waves and the mind. Now this is described even more clearly from our own experience in the following verse. What does it mean that all the senses and the thought waves of the mind subside there? Let's look at the next verse. Sarva prakara pramiti prashantihi bijatmana avasthitireva buddhehe sushuptiretasya kila pratitihi kinchinna vedmiti jagat prasiddhehe. All forms of knowing remain suspended in deep sleep, and the mind exists only in a seed form. This is proved by the universal experience, I did not know anything then. So when we say, or if we say, that in deep sleep we don't experience anything, that's not really true. Usually, when we have had a deep sleep, the next morning our experience is, oh, I slept so well. You feel rested, you feel happy, and you also know that you did not know anything then. So, experience of nothingness is an experience. So when we say I did not experience anything, another way to express that is I experienced nothing. And so next morning I could wake up and say, I did not know anything. I felt so deeply in sleep that maybe there was some thunder and lightning outside. I had no idea about it. So the experience of ignorance shows that the mind was present. The experience of bliss and rest that we have shows that the mind was present. But the activities that we normally associate with the mind, well, it's something that we are all aware of. Think about the nature of the mind now. The mind is filled with ideas. We think this, we worry about something, we remember something. So all these ideas of remembering, responding, memory, and all of these things, they are completely absent in the deep sleep state. And that is why it is said it's present in a seed form. The potentiality is there, but it's not active that time. So the seed form, the word is bija atmana. Bija means a seed. Bija atmana. Sometimes, and there is a lot of times, the deep sleep gets mentioned in Vedanta texts. And what we can say is that at present, in our unenlightened state, deep sleep is the closest we can go to having some idea of what a samadhi might look like. But it's not the samadhi experience, obviously, because in deep sleep we are completely unconscious. We have no idea. Yes, we are conscious of the ignorance, we are conscious of the bliss, but there is we are unconscious of everything else. We are unconscious of our own being at that time. So if we can have the same deep sleep experience in a fully conscious state, that would be samadhi. In the state of deep sleep, the names, forms, diversity, multiplicity, everything disappears. There is just being. And there is this joy. That joy is not coming from anything in the world, because there is no world in the deep sleep. So the joy that is experienced, the rest that is experienced, comes from one's own self. Now, if all of this experience can come in a fully conscious state, that would be samadhi. So the Vedanta teacher under whom I studied used to say that God gives us the experience of dream to teach us that just because I see something doesn't necessarily mean it is real, because dreams we see and it's not real. So dream experience we have is to learn that just because I see something, it's not real. The deep sleep experience is given to show that even when everything else disappears, I still exist. And so he used to say that, yes, we can read all these things in books, but even without books, if we are vigilant, if we are thoughtful, if we are mindful, then even from our own daily experience, we get some amazing insights. And these two very important insights, that perception of something itself is not an evidence of its existence or its reality. And even if everything else disappears, I still exist. I never disappear. Let's look at verse number 122. Dehendriya prana manohamadayah sarve vikara vishaya sukhadayah Vyomadi bhutanyakhilam cha vishvam avyakta paryantam idam hyanatma. The non-self or Anatma comprises all material entities such as the body, the senses, the life force, the mind, the ego, etc., the sense objects, pleasure, etc., all primal elements such as space, in fact, the entire universe, including the unmanifest. So this and the next verse concludes this discussion of what is Anatma, what is not self. So everything that was said in the earlier part of this section is summarized here. That all of these things, everything that is material, no matter how subtle it might be, including Maya, they are not self. In other words, all of these things are covering me, covering the real me. And because I lie buried under all these different things, I have no idea where I am, who I am. And in order to find myself, I'll have to eliminate all these layers. Now the question would be, how do I eliminate all these layers? There is a beautiful verse in Sanskrit which says that if there is a clay pot or any container made of clay and you want to destroy it, of course you will need to get a stick and break it into pieces, and then you cannot use it as a jar anymore. Or if there is a snake and you want to kill it, then you can get a gun or you can get something to kill the snake. So we know how to bring about destruction. Now, how do we destroy the snake which is seen in a semi-lit room? When I mistake a rope for a snake, how do I destroy that snake? Now, that snake, a stick is useless. A gun is useless. There's nothing you can do. The only way to destroy the snake, which is superimposed on the rope, is through knowledge. The only way the snake will disappear when I have the knowledge that this is the rope. So there are two ways of destroying things. If the things are real, I will need some other real instrument to go and destroy it. But if the thing is only an appearance, not real, not really real, then all I need is the knowledge. Knowledge of that on which it is superimposed. Knowledge of what is underneath. So if the rope is the reality behind and the snake is superimposed on it, if I have knowledge of the rope, the snake disappears. You can never see the rope and the snake at the same time. If you see the rope, you don't see the snake. If you see the snake, you don't see the rope. That's why there's another one example that is sometimes given in Vedanta books. That is when it's a little child and you give a child a teddy bear, or let's say an elephant, a toy, an elephant toy, a wooden toy painted beautifully as an elephant. Now, for a little child, that's an elephant. But for you, it's a wooden toy. Both of you are looking at the same thing, but you're seeing two different things. You cannot see if you see the elephant, you don't see the wooden toy. That is, you see it as an elephant. Or if you see it as a toy, you cannot see it as an elephant at the same time. What this means is that when people say that, oh, all this is filled with the Lord's presence, or all this is Brahman, well, that's good. I mean, intellectually it kind of feels good to acknowledge the presence of God everywhere. But experientially, as an experience, as long as I'm experiencing the world, I'm not experiencing God. I'm not experiencing that non-dual reality. And when I'm experiencing that non-dual reality, I'm no longer experiencing the world. So the two cannot be seen at the same time. This will raise a question, and that is, when a person becomes enlightened, and by enlightenment we understand person sees oneness everywhere, then all these names and forms should vanish. You cannot be seeing oneness and seeing names and forms at the same time. You cannot be seeing multiplicity and unity at the same time. And yes, through logic, these two things don't really go together. And yet we do see enlightened beings moving in the world, talking, interacting with people, and yet rooted in that oneness. And so sometimes in Vedanta, teachers have said that seeing the world itself, seeing the names and forms themselves are not an obstacle. But seeing them as real, that's the problem. So we look at the world, and if there's an enlightened being here also looks at the world, they are seeing the same thing. It feels, well, I mean, this is a big, we could still make it more complicated by asking, how do we know whether we are all seeing the same world? But we won't go there today. So let's assume that we are all seeing, we have pair of eyes, we look and we see everything as it is, and anyone else sitting here would look exactly the same way. Even if an enlightened being were to stand here and see, they would also see exactly the same thing. So then what's the difference? The difference is this. When we are not enlightened, we see everything as real, everything as an objective reality. But to an enlightened being who also sees all these things, knows that it's not real. So knowledge is the only difference. And that's a big difference. Although I'm saying it's the only difference, that makes all the difference. And therefore, enlightenment doesn't mean the disappearance of the world. It only means the reality that we imagine out there is not there. It's a little bit like if you go to see a movie and throughout that movie you never forget that it's a movie. Your experience will be a little different than someone who gets so absorbed into that movie that they forget that they are sitting, maybe they have a popcorn in their hand and they even forget to eat the popcorn because they have got so much kind of sucked into that story, got perhaps identified with certain character in that story. Sometimes if the movie is well made and it kind of grabs people's attention fully, then sometimes people weep and cry or shocked, or if it's a horror story, people are terrified. So when we respond that way, those moments we have forgotten it's a movie. It's kind of become real for us. And so that's the difference between how an enlightened being sees the world, how an unenlightened person sees the world. So all of these things in the world come under Maya. Look at verse 123, which concludes the section. Maya karyam sarvam mahadadi deha paryantam asat idam anatma tattvam viddhitvam marumarichika kalpam. Know that Maya and all the effects of Maya, ranging from the cosmic intelligence to the gross body, are non-self and unreal like a mirage in a desert. The word cosmic intelligence, there is a category called Mahat, and oftentimes it is considered the first evolute. As soon as Maya appears on the scene, the first product of Maya, if you like, is this Mahat. It's at the cosmic level. And then, of course, when this oneness gets shattered, and that's what Maya does, that which is one, Maya makes it appear as if it is many. So this cosmic intelligence gets fractured into our own individual intelligence. The cosmic body gets fractured into our individual bodies. So everything, there is a cosmic aspect to it, and there is an individual aspect to it. So the two words used in Sanskrit for this is called samashti for the collective and vyashti for the individual. So a forest is a collection of trees. So a single tree versus a forest. So this is somehow considered like that. So it's possible to look at just as we have this body which is made up of material particles, this is the individual body. Now, if you were to take the entire material universe, including all the galaxies we know and we don't know about, the entire creation itself, material creation, it's possible to view that as the cosmic body of the divine. Material, well, our body is material, that body is material as well. So just like I have my own little mind, it's possible to think about the collective mind, all the minds put together, a summation of all the minds. And this is how sometimes they compare. And oftentimes many mystics, you see some of their visions they have had reflect this kind of understanding. There is a whole section in mysticism called nature mysticism. And we see accounts of it. There have been great mystics who have just sat and looked at this vast field, or looked at the trees and the wind blowing, and had this experience that is this breathing going on in the cosmic body of the divine. And it's a beautiful way to try to understand the material universe. The respect for nature can come rather easily if we identify this as somehow a manifestation, an emanation of the divine. And I think that kind of a spiritual outlook is very important today when we are dealing with climate change and the greed in the human heart, which the deforestation and all of those things that are happening. If we learn to divinize our experience of the world, not only will it help us spiritually, but also it might help us on a much more mundane level to live happy and productive lives. And therefore, this verse is very, very interesting, because it says Maya and all its effects, all the products of Maya, ranging from the cosmic intelligence to this gross body, are non-self and unreal, like a mirage in a desert. So we often speak about the rope and the snake here, but that's just one of the hundreds of examples that can be given. So one other example that often comes in books is of a mirage in a desert. You see water, you're walking in the desert for a long time, you see water there, and when you go, you're thinking there's water, no matter how close you go, you just see sand. So again, on this dry sand, water is superimposed. And instead of seeing sand there, I see water. Just like on a rope, a snake is superimposed. Instead of seeing the rope, I see the snake. The mechanism is exactly the same. So this brings to an end this section on the non-self. And now how does this non-self, this Anatma, how does it hide the self? That is a section that we will begin studying now. But before we discuss how that non-self covers the self, there are a few verses here giving the nature of the self itself. So look at verse number 124. Atate sampravakshyami swarupam paramatmanah yat vidnyaya naro bandhat muktaf kaivalyamashnute. Now I'll explain to you the nature of the Supreme Self, knowing which a person is freed from bondage and attains liberation. So the teacher, remember, this is the dialogue between the teacher and a student. So the teacher tells the disciple now that now I'll begin describing to you the nature of the Supreme Self. Now, why the adjective supreme? If self is all that exists, the word supreme is superfluous, because supreme would say, well, there are lots of selves, and this one is like the Supreme Self. The Sanskrit word is Paramatma. So there is Atma, and Parama means supreme. So the adjective supreme is a provisional adjective, if you like, in a sense that because the idea that every one of us has the self within, every one of us feels the sense of me, I am someone, the sense of I, me as a being is present in all of us. So the idea of there being many people, many selves, is ingrained in our thinking. And therefore, kind of making a concession to that present thinking of ours, the books often refer to this one self, the only true self, as the Supreme Self. In other words, okay, if you want to think of yourself as a self, in your present understanding, fine, but you are not supreme. You are still a very puny, weak, mortal, stupid self. Actually, they do use the word oftentimes, even in murkha, which is like stupid. And in contrast to all the ignorant things that we do in life, there is a self which is supreme, which is higher than all of this. So that's the reason the word supreme is used. But when we attain knowledge, when all these false selves disappear, when my identifying myself with this body, mind, and this kind of a little ego, when this goes away, then I discover that the self alone exists. There is just one. In fact, at that time, you cannot even say there is only one. You can only say there are not two. That's the only way you can speak about it. Because the idea of one comes along with the idea of many. And if the many have totally disappeared, when you don't even have the memory of the many, then one is a totally unnecessary term. You don't even have to say that reality is one. So all of these statements that we make, oneness and supreme, all of it is from a present ignorant state of mind. In that highest state, no words are necessary. You just become silent, because at that stage, as the Upanishad says, who is to say anything to whom? There is nobody else to speak with. There is nothing to see. There is nothing to talk. Just being. Now that, expressing it in that way doesn't feel like it's a very attractive state of mind. It's like nobody, there's going to be nobody to talk to. Because at present, when we are just by ourselves, we get bored to death. We just want company. Think about how much people have suffered during the pandemic. Because, well, now at least things are opening up, so it's possible. We didn't have these in-person classes for a long time, but then thank God for technology. There was Zoom. We could do all of this. But there are people who have suffered a lot because they could not meet other people. And this could be our own experience, pandemic or not. We quickly get bored when we are left to ourselves. So even when we are alone, nowadays, of course, most of us have a cell phone, a phone with us, and a phone is really not, phone does more things which are not phone-like. Yeah, so if we don't have any people around, people can surf the internet, they can watch movies, they can watch YouTube, they can go to social media or pick up a phone and do. So just imagine if you were to be just by yourself, your cell phone battery is dead, you don't have a television at home, your door is locked, you cannot go out. What will you do? It's good to practice being alone, at least for a few minutes every day. There are several benefits to this. First of all, if you have a meditation practice, if you are in the habit of doing prayer and meditation every day, you're already kind of trying to find that aloneness, even if for a few minutes every day. And the reason many people find it difficult to concentrate their minds in meditation is because of the resistance of the mind to be alone. That's why even if you could just be by yourself, you sit with the closed eyes and with nobody to distract you, but the mind says, I don't want to be alone. So the mind rushes, thinks about this, thinks about that, thinks about other people, thinks about yesterday or tomorrow. The mind refuses to be alone. And if somehow the mind is forced, mind is supposed not able to think of anything, and you are just by yourself, then we get bored. First of all, if we get bored when we are alone, it can be a very humbling experience. If we get bored, if I get bored by my own company, we can't blame other people if they get bored by our company, right? And so if we want other people to enjoy our company, we should be able to enjoy our own company. And the only way to know whether we can enjoy our own company is to just be alone and see whether it's enjoyable or not. Because if I cannot bear my own company, I have no right to inflict it on other people. It's just unfair. It's a crime. That's first thing. But second thing also is there is again, in one of the books, there is a beautiful verse. I don't remember the original Sanskrit at this moment, but what it says is this, that no matter how close people may be to you, no matter how much of a support structure you may have around you, the most that people can accompany you up to is up to the cremation ground or to the burial ground. The journey beyond death is to be done by our own selves. Nobody, no matter how much people love us, they cannot come with us beyond that point. So sooner or later, we are going to have to be alone. Now, throughout our life, if we have never tried being alone, if we have avoided being alone, then what will we do when nature forces us to be alone at that stage? On the other hand, if I'm accustomed to being alone now, then I will not feel so much like a fish out of water when after death I'm just by myself. Swami Vivekananda once said, he said that in the West they believe that if a person lives alone for 20 years, that person will go insane. In fact, even for the inmates now, those who are put in solitary confinement, there is a limit to how much they can be put. Because beyond a certain time period, solitary confinement is considered a form of torture. Of course, I mean, still, not that these rules are followed all the time, but at least that's the official rule. And therefore, there is a belief that if a person is just left alone, that person could go insane. And then Swami Vivekananda added, in the East they believe, unless a person has cultivated the ability to stay alone for 20 years, that person cannot become fully sane. Now, that doesn't mean I have to be, no, Swamiji is not saying that be alone for 20 years. But the idea is the ability to be by myself. And therefore, it's helpful to have a daily practice to see, even for those few minutes, can I be alone? And not just physically alone. Even not, the mind shouldn't have to think about any other thing in the world. Because only when the mind is quiets down to that level, will we have the freedom to turn that mind toward God, to turn that mind toward the object of our meditation. Otherwise, it's just going to be a constant struggle that we are sitting physically in one place and the mind is running helter-skelter, and every time it kind of drag it, hold it onto the object for a few seconds or a minute or two, and then it runs again. And sometimes, therefore, we get exhausted. Within a few minutes, we get so exhausted in this trying to control the mind that sometimes people just fall asleep through exhaustion. That's why meditation ends up in sleep, because of exhaustion. On the other hand, if I have learned to be quiet, both physically and mentally, then meditation can give us the rest that even deep sleep cannot give. Yes, presently, deep sleep is the best rest we can get in life. We cannot feel rested in the waking state when you are running about doing everything. We don't feel rested while we are dreaming because the mind is jumping all the time. But in deep sleep state is our best chance nowadays to get rest. But even in the deep sleep state, the mind is not fully at rest. There is a in Yoga Sutras, they say that Nidra, sleep itself, is a mental modification. And so the mind is almost inactive, you can say. It's not fully inactive. It's because if it were fully inactive, you would be in samadhi. It's almost inactive. Now, in a state of meditation, you get a much deeper rest. And that's why people who meditate well don't need that much sleep, because we already get the rest in meditation, and so the body feels rejuvenated, renewed quickly. So when we begin next time, we'll begin with verse 125, where first the teacher will describe who the Supreme Self is, and then describe how the Supreme Self is concealed. So if you have any thoughts, ideas, comments, questions, feel free to ask.
Swamiji. You mentioned, I think you mentioned that in Samadhi, we are conscious of the surrounding and yet experiencing bliss.
No, not conscious of the surroundings. I just said that in deep sleep, the experience of bliss that we have and the rest that we have, we can have exactly the same in samadhi, but deep sleep is a state in which we are unconscious. In samadhi, we will be fully conscious.
So we are conscious of what, Swamiji?
Well,
or at the in samadhi state?
But I mean, samadhi is kind of a blanket term, because there is not just one samadhi. So there have been people who have been meditating, say, deeply on Krishna, and when they are in this deeply absorbed state, they might see Krishna, they might hear Krishna's flute. If someone is meditating on the formless entity, then they will have a different experience. So whatever is the object of your adoration or meditation, which ultimately resulted in that deep absorption, will determine the content of what you see. And that's why sometimes they speak about the nirvikalpa samadhi. Vikalpa means differentiation. Nirvikalpa, no differentiation. So that is, in non-dualistic thinking, that is considered the highest, because there is no distinction at all. You don't see any form, don't see any names. You just are, just pure existence and consciousness and bliss. So this experience of Sat Chit Ananda without any distinction, that would be. So again, there is no one definitive description to say this is what you will experience in samadhi.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Pranam Swamiji. Swamiji, I've always wondered, today also you talked about the real and the unreal, that when we see the world, it may be unreal, but we don't have the knowledge, so we think it is real. And then it was very interesting when you said enlightened people, how do they see the world? So my question is this, for us, every suffering, our little problems, they seem so real. Then why do the enlightened ones come down to reduce our suffering, if it is not real?
Good question. Yeah, please sit down. The Tulsidas in his Ramayana, he says that the heart of the enlightened ones is like butter. And just like butter melts at the least when you bring heat close to it. So he says this, when the enlightened ones see the suffering which is often compared to heat, the burning pain of suffering, their hearts melt. And then Tulsidas says that the heart of a saint, the heart of an enlightened one, is even more powerful than butter, because butter melts only when butter comes in contact with heat. But the saint's heart melts not because of the pain that they are experiencing, but seeing the pain that others are experiencing. So, yes, logically it makes no sense, in the sense that, well, a person is enlightened, they know that only they alone exist, nothing else exists. So there is no way to understand how they feel compassionate. On the other hand, this we do see. So on the other hand is the experience that we have from our perspective when we see these saintly figures helping and being so compassionate. And therefore we then have to figure out what could be happening. And one of the ways, therefore, they say is clearly the theory about prarabdha karma, that even after enlightenment, the enlightened person continues to live because of the remaining prarabdha karma. And because their hearts are so pure, they can continue to do only what is natural to them. And so it's natural for them to go and help the needy. They do not do it out of a sense of duty. An enlightened person has no duty, no responsibility of any kind. In fact, the Gita says, Tasya karyam na vidyate. Such a person has no responsibility, no duty, no commitment to anything. But just as the sun has no duty to give light, but it's the nature of the sun to give light. So similarly, it's the nature of the enlightened beings to help. They just do it because they do it. But it's a good question that logically it wouldn't make sense. But in reality, we see that's happening. Yeah. And therefore, what it also means is that what do we learn from this? And that is that if enlightened beings naturally and selflessly go and help other people, then if we want to be enlightened, we should try also to help others as much as it is possible and to do it selflessly in the spirit of karma yoga. Now, for an enlightened being, that will be very effortless. But because we are not enlightened, it may not always be effortless. We may have to use a lot of effort. But doing things using effort is a way of practicing which will eventually make it effortless for me. So if you're learning to play some musical instrument, for instance, the first day I go to learn something, I'm not going to be able to do it well. I will also need to practice. All these great musicians, they are practiced for hours and hours every day until they reach a point when it becomes completely effortless for them. So similarly, we have to try to imitate what these enlightened ones do, and we will fail, we will not succeed fully, we have to use a lot of effort, but if we persist, eventually we'll be able to do it effortlessly. So that's the idea.
Swamiji, I'm trying to understand what you say about restless of mind. Mm-hmm. So we cannot sleep. We sleep only a certain period of time because karma wakes up. So this restless of mind has anything to do with karma, because why we cannot concentrate? Even we put all, like for me, I'm trying to put everything, but mind gets restless. So I'm trying to understand what it is. It is accumulate of karma,
No, it's not karma. We just have to keep on trying. It's like if I've never gone jogging in my life, then when I start jogging, it's not going to be easy. There's going to be inner resistance of not wanting to do it. And then even if I do a little bit, then my feet, my knees are going to ache. But if I don't give up, if I keep on trying without getting discouraged, then gradually I can build up my strength and I'll be able to jog. So similarly about making the mind still, of acquiring the ability to bring the mind under control and to focus it, because many of us may not have done it for a long time, the mind is now refusing to do it. It's like a pet, a dog which is not trained. It's no fun. And of course, those who have teenage children know also at home, it's tough. But the mind is a little bit like that. And so if we keep on trying without getting discouraged, can I focus my mind even for 30 seconds? And if I'm able to do it for 30 seconds, and I can say, well, now let me do it for a minute. Let me do it for 2 minutes. So with lot of patience, lot of perseverance, we can build up our strength. So it's possible to do it. We cannot and we should not simply say, oh, the mind is restless, everybody has the problem. And then it's almost like giving up. It's like, no, nothing can be done about it. No, I think it's all in our hands. We can do it. Yes. It's tough, but it can be done. Yeah. That's why, that is the question Krishna asks Arjuna in the Gita, that this mind is so difficult to control. And, Arjuna asks this question to Krishna, and Krishna agrees. Krishna completely agrees that the mind is difficult to control. But Krishna says, yes, it's difficult, but it can be controlled. And he says two things, Abhyasa and Vairagya. Abhyasa means practice, relentless practice. And Vairagya means detachment. The more, where the mind goes is where I'm attached. And so if I can detach myself, even if temporarily, one might say, well, I cannot detach myself from the world. Okay, can I at least detach myself from the world to the extent of saying, for the next 30 minutes, nothing in the world is more important to me than my own mantra, than my own deity. So can I detach myself from all distractions for half an hour? That's the way we try to practice. Yeah. Yeah.
Swamiji, all these layers, like we have subtle body, gross body, and other bodies. When we are in deep sleep, none of them are really exist.
No. Causal body is there.
Causal body is there. So is it the causal body which is experiencing the bliss? Like we get the taste of bliss. So
no,
who is experiencing in the deep sleep?
Good question. Please sit down. Now, all these bodies, the gross body, subtle body, they are all in matter. Just like this table is material, these bodies are material also. For all we know, the table may be experiencing and may be learning a lot of Vivekachudamani because we are using the same table all these classes. But we don't know that. At least from our human perspective, it doesn't feel like the table is experiencing anything. So similarly, the bodies by themselves cannot experience, because they're just material there. The Atman is just pure consciousness. Atman doesn't need to experience. And therefore, the Atman cannot experience anything. The bodies don't experience anything. Therefore, the good question, who is the one who experiences? And the answer is, this deluded Atman who thinks that I am the body and mind, that deluded entity experiences everything. So when the delusion goes away, then Atman says, well, there's no experience or anything like that. I mean, we can ask the similar question with people say moksha. Who is the one who gets moksha? Who is the one who gets liberated? Because the body and mind don't even exist. They are unreal. There's no liberation for them. The Atman is already free, eternally free. So the Atman doesn't need moksha. The body and mind are unreal. There is no moksha for them. So who will want that moksha? And I asked this question to my teacher, and then his answer was, whoever thinks they are in bondage have to strive for moksha. So as long as you think you are in bondage, you will want to be free. Once you become free, you will realize that you are always free. It's a little bit like if you are hungry in your dream, then what can you do? You have to search for food, right? If you're hungry. Now, that hunger is a dream hunger, not like a real hunger. But the food that will you eat also is a dream food. Now, let's say you are hungry, you don't find any food, you are searching for food everywhere. It's a great problem, intense suffering, and then you wake up in the morning. So your problem is not really solved. The problem was food. You didn't get food. But the whole problem was dissolved. That your hunger disappeared. Because hunger disappeared, the need for food disappeared. And then you wake up and say, well, I was never really hungry. I didn't need anything. Right? In the same way, right now, because we feel we are in bondage, we say, I want moksha, I want to be free, I want to meditate, I want to do this, I need to do that. But then when you are enlightened, you say, well, I was never in bondage. I didn't need anything. That was the idea. In fact, there is this one verse which is often quoted, which says that there is no freedom, there is no bondage, no one is seeking freedom, no one is asking for bondage. This is the absolute reality. But right now, we are in this relative reality. So we experience our limitedness, we experience our mortality, we experience lack of satisfaction, and then we are trying to find ways to feel satisfied, to remove the suffering, to remove the bondage, and to become free. Yeah. It's a very strange situation. But what can be done? All right. So we'll stop here today. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. So we will continue with this study next Wednesday. On Sunday for satsang, we have a guest speaker, a senior nun from our Vedanta Society of Southern California at Santa Barbara, named Pravrajika Krishna Prana, is visiting, and I have requested her to speak with us, and she has kindly agreed. And her subject for Sunday will be habit / choice. So I would encourage all of you to come to listen to her. And on Saturday, we will have our meditation as usual. So let's conclude with the prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto you.